So we all know that the number one thing that you're trying to do if you're trying to defend something is to know what the heck you're defending. Our next panel is going to present an open source tool called Scout that helps you understand what your attack surface is, but do so in a way that doesn't require fancy, expensive tools. So we're very excited to have Brittany and Dileep from Copart and Anchal from Apple to talk about the Scout tool and how to manage your attack surface on a budget.
Hello everyone, my name is Brittany Little. We are going to talk to you today about how you could manage your attack surface on a budget. So just going to go over an agenda of what we're going to look to accomplish today. We're going to give a little introduction of the team. We're going to introduce the first problem that we want to talk about. It's exposing assets to the internet. And then we're going to talk about our solution to that, which is Scout External. We're going to introduce the second problem that we're looking to solve, which is exposing sensitive data internally, and our solution of Scout Internal. We're just going to overall sum up Scout as our homegrown tool that we've built and compare it to some of the off-the-shelf tools that are out there today. We're going to look at what's next for our tool and then close on a few tidbits that we have for you guys. So I will hand it off to Anchal to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, Anchal this side. I have background in pen testing, cloud security, threat management, building and automating security tools. Currently, I'm working as a security engineer at Apple.
And then as I mentioned, my name is Brittany Little. I focus more on the product management side of things, really focusing around identifying security risks, developing strategic implementation plans for security products, and communicating with key stakeholders.
Hi everyone, myself Dileep Gurazada. With my background in security automation and engineering, allowed me to build and deploy solutions for a wide range of use cases at Copart.
All right. So now we're going to get into identifying our problem and really diagramming the problem that we're looking to solve, which is exposing internal assets. Every company has a data center, headquarters, and satellite sites. When we look at the data center, there's always going to be assets and sites in there that should and shouldn't be exposed to the internet. But what happens if one of these assets or one of these sites is exposed? There's times where attackers are just sitting there trying to find ways into a company's environment, and they're scanning the internet using tools like Shodan to see what companies have left exposed. And so if they find these sites, then they're really able to gain access into the data center and move laterally depending on whatever their motive might be. I'm sure we've seen instances that have happened like this. You have to, this is just one example where hackers actually accidentally exposed their training videos. IBM researchers actually found the videos on a virtual private cloud server that was left exposed due to misconfiguration of security settings. So this is something that we see and have been seeing, and we were also looking at the Verizon data breach report, which you can see here on the left side. It's showing a chart that talks about how misconfigurations continue to be one of the top error varieties in miscellaneous error breaches. Again, this is just one way that assets could be exposed to the internet. And then if you look to the chart to the right, this is another issue that Verizon data breach report identified, and it's referring to old internet-facing vulnerabilities. And the existence of these old vulnerabilities is just, again, another way assets can get exposed to the internet. So the industry is recognizing that this is a problem, and tools are being built specifically to solve this issue of identifying these assets that are exposed to the internet. One being Expanse, that you can see in this article. It's a new technology that Peter Thiel funded. But today, we really want to walk you through our solution to this problem and how it might be beneficial to some of you that are trying to accomplish this on a budget specifically. So now that we've identified the problem, how do we know where we are exposed? How do we define our attack surface? So throughout our presentation, we're going to define our entire attack surface, but right now we're going to start with specifically our external attack surface. And the way that we've defined this is by looking at our external IPs, checking things like our cloud vendors, and looking at AWS, and looking at our domain registers like GoDaddy and other sources within our data center. So now I'm going to hand it over to Anchal, who's going to talk through our solution to ensure we aren't leaving any sites exposed externally.
Thanks, Brittany. So, like Brittany explained the problem of exposing internal assets and managing them, we ended up developing Scout. So Scout was developed to detect any of the accidental asset exposure due to misconfiguration and to detect it before the bad guys discover it. Also, it's capable of performing regular automated vulnerability assessment on any of our external assets, be it data center, headquarters, or satellite sites. I've broken down Scout into like 6 different stages, starting with footprinting, followed by enumeration, and then working on gathering intelligence, moving to vulnerability assessment where we establish the baseline, and then finally firing off the alerts for the team. 5 out of 6 stages here are automated right from the start, and the 6th stage automatically becomes automated once we do like the first run. So going into footprinting, this is where we configure the tool. That's like the initial stage. Here we just connect all our domain registrars, cloud providers, vendors such as like AWS, GoDaddy, and also we feed in the info that we know about. So that could be any of the registered IP addresses that your organization might have. Then we move on to enumeration stage, where Scout will query all the previously connected services, so say AWS, GoDaddy, and all those, and then get the list of all the IP addresses, DNS names, FQDNs from there. And this information is going to be used in the intel gathering stage. That's the next one. So in intel gathering stage, what Scout does is it performs like number of queries on Shodan and Census using like the previous data it has collected from the previous 2 stages, and then moves on to vulnerability assessment. And vulnerability assessment, Scout performs other things such as like port scans, whois details, and banner matching. And once both the reports are combined from intel gathering stage as well as vulnerability assessment stage, the data is sent to baseline stage. And in baseline stage, what we do is this is done only like the first time, where we send out the report to SOC. So what SOC would do is they'll do the initial analysis and establish a baseline during the first run. Once that's done, all the alerts start firing off. And I'll walk you through an example how one might discover, let's say, like an exposed AWS instance hosting like a Apache server. So in the enumeration, in the footprinting stage, once you connect your AWS account, in enumeration stage, it'll pull down all the IPs, and the service would get caught in like intel gathering phase or the vulnerability assessment phase. And once that goes through the baseline data, it knows like this alert needs to be fired off, and you'll get alerted on either Slack, Teams, or like your ticketing platform. Now we'll move to the challenges that we faced while developing this. So the first and the biggest one we faced was establishing baseline. This was the biggest one since it's manually time consuming, and here is where our SOC came into help, and they helped us establish the baseline. The second one was adding new vendors. So every time we wanted to add a new vendor, we had to research what kind of useful data we can pull that's going to enrich our Scout analysis. And moving to the third one, that's our scanning infrastructure that we used for Scout. So since Scout performs number of various scans, we realized it was creating a bottleneck in Scout's performance. We then moved few tasks to AWS serverless services, which perform these tasks in parallel without incurring like significant costs. And this comprises of the external scanning that we do, and giving it to Dileep for the internal phase. Thank you.
Thanks, Anchal. As Anchal spoke about identifying and blocking the internal assets being exposed, it is equally important to identify your proprietary or sensitive data in your systems and protect them. Most common ways of exposing the sensitive data involves data being duplicated in unsafe environments. As you can see in the posts attached in this slide, all these are databases exposed because of insecure configurations and are also less or no authentication in place. So now let's draw the problem here. So as you know, or as a recap that Brittany and Anchal mentioned, each company have their data center headquarters and satellite sites as locations. And your proprietary data will be stored in data center. And this is more secure location, as you know. But if you look at one of the HDLC processes, most of these developers require this proprietary data either to enhance the existing application or to debug the existing production issue. During this process, the data will transfer from data center to personal workstation of the developers. During this process, the whole data will be duplicated across data center, and it could be in headquarters or your corporate and also in satellite sites. So now think about the scenario where the attacker could be looking for any of these systems, like Anchal mentioned in the external assets. So now you're looking at locations which are headquarters and satellite sites, which are not equally protected or safe as data center, and being exposing this sensitive information. Now let's look at the data breach report by Verizon, what it says. As you can see, misuse of data leading to potential attacks or hacks are common. And these involves categories like privilege abuse and data mishandling, etc. Now let's define our attack surface within our internal systems, right? So to identify these proprietary or sensitive data, we need to look at our database servers. And mostly because these are the systems that are used by developers to store data or retrieve data, which could have potential production data, which is proprietary to your organization. And these include servers like MS SQL, Oracle, MariaDB, and HTTPS websites or services that are running. Now, let's talk about how Scout Internal helps in identifying and preventing these from being exposed. As a recap, the data has been transferred or duplicated from data center to endpoint workstations, which could be in corporate or satellite sites. Now, Scout is a tool that automatically detects any of these sensitive information across these locations based on your IP ranges that you are provided to it. So the SOC can basically go through those reports and close them down or secure them so that no attacker can scan these or find these sensitive information. Now let's talk about how we develop internally about Scout, how we go about developing Scout internally. So initially we go through assets that have data or databases running in them. So how could you achieve this is by using your infrastructure scanners like Rapid7, which is already scanning for vulnerabilities within your servers or assets. So based on that, you would be able to identify any type of assets that are running databases in them based on the port number and the services running in them. Once we identify the assets, the next step will be to detect the service type and database type. So if we know there is a service, say MS SQL running in them, we should be able to retrieve the port number and also the typical database type, say MariaDB or Oracle. So what it helps us is to create a automated tool or basically a program to interact with those databases and pull the data. So to access these data stores, you need access to these environments as well as the databases within your corporate environment. Once you access these data stores, you should be able to retrieve the data. And once you have the data, you should be able to scan for sensitive information using publicly known packages for regular expressions of PII, or you can create your own for your own use cases that is more proprietary to your organization. And once you identify this sensitive information or proprietary information, we should be able to generate alerts and send an email or notify our SOC team to take an action upon. So let's talk about some of the internal challenges I have faced while building this tool. As you can see, it involves access to a lot of assets and data. So the deployment of this tool is very essential, understanding where to deploy and what access is needed on the network level as well as the data level. So placing this tool is very much key as part of deploying this. And once we have the access figured out, network access figured out to the assets, we also need to ensure that the access to the data stores itself has been taken care of. With user workstations handling the data, it's not easy to get the access to those data stores. So continuously working with them and some manual effort is involved. For the second point, we have developing tool to handle new types of databases. Since our tool has been developed or deployed at a given point of time, we know the data stores that have been actively used within our organization, and we were able to create programs that can interact with those data stores using Python. And we were able to access those data and produce these reports. But with the technology being advanced and most of the developers using the new technologies like NoSQL databases, for example, we have to continuously develop the tool to tackle those problems. And then the next one is improving sensitive data detection signatures. As you might know, PII changes from company to company as well as country to country. And also the proprietary data for each company might be different. So creating the signatures and updating them is a continuous process, not just a one-time thing. And then finally, the latency issues. So while we run this tool, this is continuously interacting with data stores to identify if any new data being added to those data stores and if it could potentially be a PII data. So during this process, the actual database interaction has been happening continuously, which is causing a latency issue with other apps talking to these data stores. So working with those data store teams as well as the services teams which interacts with databases, we came up with a preferred timeline to run these tools and also not to disturb the productivity of those teams. So let's take a recap of our attack surface. Right now we have determined about external and internal, and we have covered all these. Now, based on the solution comparison, let's talk about what is our homegrown solution and how it helps in comparison to the industry solutions or other products out there. For homegrown, the main pro for it is customization. In the sense, each environment is unique and have their own data or even infrastructure that is needed to be supported by other tools or your own tool. So, for example, you have your own type of domain registrars like Anchal mentioned, GoDaddy, and also cloud solutions like AWS or GCP or Azure. So it varies from company to company, and also the flexibility like deploying this tool. Some of these solutions does not, like for example, Scout internal or external can be deployed across within your enterprise or outside your enterprise. And the cons for this tool is basically the management of this tool, which requires a mid to senior level engineer. And off-the-shelf products, I know we have developed this tool for the past year and more. So during the process of our assessment, this is what we have found out. So it requires low maintenance and also less interaction from the teams, so that is a pro for it. And for the biggest con is the customization, like for taking the custom inputs from each company, because each of their infrastructure is different, like I mentioned before. Now, let's talk about what else can we do other than looking at our external and internal assets. As you might know, each company is evolving and using Internet of Things a lot. For example, being a remote site locations using thermostat, smart fridge, Alexa for some of their operational purposes. We need to somehow include Internet of Things to as it is a biggest attack vector right now. So we need to work on those, and it is upcoming for us. And what's next? As you can see, the challenges that we are facing is mostly around the customizable things. The sensitive data identification is one thing that has been taken much of our time, passing through a lot of regular expressions and evaluating all the data. It takes a lot of time. So to reduce the time, we would be either doing parallel processing or also removing a lot of false positives that could be part of the regexes. And then the next one is developing automated remediation processes. This tool is very customizable and also has a lot of alerts that's being generated. So it's not straightforward to automate the remediation, but we have identified a few use cases where we can eliminate the manual work being done. Then let's look at the sensitive data and see what are the controls we can keep for them. In the sense, so now we have identified the sensitive data within your internal systems. Now, what are the controls you can keep to make sure that they are not being accessed internally or externally by attackers? On the conclusion side of things, no solution is perfect in the sense every solution has their own drawbacks, like I've talked about cons in the previous slide. Each solution might be customizable to some point. We need to work with their leadership team and develop the roadmap for it. And for the customization side of things, we have to build our own plugins or probably work with them to create those plugins as part of the roadmap for the solution. Now, and the final one probably is know your attack surface. So this attack surface is very tricky in the sense it evolves day to day, in the sense of the technology being evolved, and a lot of departments have using technology more than before. The reason being the ease of use, and this creates a problem of exposing a lot of new type of infrastructure. For example, recently IoT we are talking about, and also there could be AI-based solutions out there that could be exposed later. So keeping track of what being used within the company is always a starting point for everyone starting to build a solution. And the final thought about this is most of these products are incomplete and very expensive, so it's better to start building our own solution in here. Thanks for your time.
So I'm curious, how did you guys come together to create this tool and as an open source thing? Because obviously it's not part of your company's vision. So, tell us about the genesis of you guys coming together and saying, people need this, let's build it. That's not, a lot of people say there's a need. Not everyone says, let's solve it. How did you guys decide to come together and do that?
I can take it initially, but later probably they can add as well, Anchal and Brittany. So we also presented probably on 2017 a tool called open source tool called GitHub Guardian in BSides Las Vegas. So this is my second time presenting here. So our company and basically our department, security department, has always been looking for ways to create this open source software and see how it benefits the industry. So that's how we have the strategy going forward in looking at any of the problems that we solve, how we can better help the community out there. And we have seen BSides have been a great platform so far for us, and we were able to do it before, and then we started working on these projects and we thought it will be a great benefit, and then it happened in such a way that we were able to do it again.
And are you guys involved in a number of other open source projects that are sort of related or across the security community?
Not actively, but I've been part of some of these tools like SemGrep and a couple of other linting tools on the security side. We're not been active development, but we've been more willing to build our own products. We've been stuck in there, but that's our next goal, to move on to that next level and be a part of the community that is actually developing other things as well.
Nice, and we'll come back into sort of the future of this project in a little bit. But let's sort of talk about some of the steps. I think your presentation did a really good job of sort of saying, here's the various steps. First step, enrollment, picking, identifying what you have, sort of the core basics. But as you pointed out, that data is often distributed in a lot of different places. Can you talk through some of the challenges that someone's going to be facing when they think through that process, and maybe what you guys had to go through to get integration into other tools?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. So yeah, that was one of the biggest challenges that we faced, was just to find a starting point. And the one thing we always found was good was just talking to the accounts department, because they are the ones who pay for all that stuff. So that gives us a good starting point. Okay, which all services do we pay for, and go from there. So if your company has a really good IT asset management, I think your organization should not face that issue. If not, I would suggest go to your accounting department and start from there, and just figuring out what services is everyone using, be it your developers or your security team or any of the, even the legal team. So that was a good starting point.
Nice. So, and one of the things you guys talked about was the importance of sort of tracking internet-facing applications. Of course, today, the perimeter is quite a difficult thing to define. And in fact, if you're doing security well, there'll be some very important things that you need to track, but that ideally aren't internet-facing or have some amount of protection in front of them. Do you guys draw a distinction between that, or you think it's important to sort of list everything possible as the maximum set?
Just to rephrase that question, probably for us to understand.
Sure.
So what is the scope of the applications, right? Is it what you're asking?
Yeah, let's try. You asked it much better and shorter than I did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully I'm answering the right question then. So our starting point was to identify the external facing. So the way we did was, like you mentioned, Anchal, to go through accounting, or also look in some of our access logs or DNS logs to identify those applications. But one of the other steps we have done at Coparty is mostly we SSO'd or single sign-on, or basically integrated with a lot of IDP providers. So the apps that are not actively being routed through these solution like Okta or any of these. So that's when we get to know the list of apps that we need to do these assessment for, which includes different set of infrastructures. That is AWS, or it could be Salesforce, or it could be any other tools that your company uses. But it's also helped people to reach out to us in asking to do SSO for these applications as well, for the ones that we don't know of, because that's ease of use for the users. So that's the other way we were able to capture these websites.
Nice. And have you had to think about or deal with sort of the opposite of external facing, right? The internal facing assets, where you say this is important, because if someone could get inside and hop over, they could do a lot of damage, right? Obviously, AD is the good one, but are there other ways that you guys have started thinking about that, or you say that's an important issue, but we're going to leave that as a separate issue?
Actually, we did that too. So that's part of our second talk, the internal asset identification. So the main goal of these internal assets are to identify those which have our sensitive information or proprietary information that might actually leak something out to the internet. So the goal was to identify these data residing in the systems. So that's the part of our second talk, which is identifying those assets internally. So the goal there was to see which most of these, I think the most common use case that we have seen across the companies are the developers actively accessing those production data for various reasons. One I mentioned was around solving the existing production issue. They need the active data, actual data to test instead of using the test data, which may not solve the actual problem. So for that reasons, they're unsecurely storing these data in their personal stations and other locations. So we try to solve these to first come back and say, where is our actual production data residing? Is it only in data center or anywhere else too? So then we were able to identify these workstations and started finding a way to secure them. We are in the process of securing them. The goal was to make it more creating right processes for these people to access these data and also secure these systems that are having the sensitive or proprietary data.
Nice, thank you. So zooming out a little bit, in your talk, you mentioned, hey, there are tools out there that are doing this. You flagged one very prominent funder, and of course we all know that there are further products. I think a lot of folks that were selling network management tools in the sort of late aughts sort of rebrand themselves as IoT tracking tools so you can manage things on your network. So it's a rich marketplace. As you guys are building this, what was your initial vision for the audience of who would want something like Scout in particular? And then as this has evolved, tell me how you've seen sort of your vision of the user base evolve as well.
I think the initial POC, I think probably Anchal might have done with the other solutions out there. The main reason that every tool is not perfectly fit for a company, any company, right? So because you need to know your attack surface as any company, like a medium, small, or a large sized company. But I think Anchal might explain it later after my answer to this. The common problem we have seen is the customization to your environment. None of these tools come with your customizations because you have chosen a different vendor or a different third-party software, or you are a complete SaaS-based application versus you have an on-prem data center that you work on deploying your systems in there. So all these different customizations are not actively being during our process of assessment, right? So it's a year back or so. So we're talking about not these customizations being readily available. It's a hard problem for any companies because they have to still work on building those plugins or those stuff. Unless the company is ready to work with you and do those, or else you are anyways building half of the solution. So that's our main idea on that.
Interesting. Now that makes. And are there types of companies or organizations that you think are particularly that have demonstrated some interest, or that you think will be particularly helpful here? Probably not Fortune 100, right? I know you guys do amazing work, but so like, how would you characterize who should be paying attention? And maybe our audience is, maybe there are folks out there that are working for megacorps, but we want to make sure they know, when they're talking to their friends, you should think about this for their needs.
I think probably let me start with the initial startup-based companies, right? So they just keep on building this stuff which they are not aware of, or using the technologies that are readily available. So that creates more problems in the long run because you're not knowing the assets as well. It's just keeping this tool in mind, and also making sure what it needs. It needs inputs from all the sources. We have the surface, or basically our assets being accessed from. So taking that into consideration, probably they can start in the early part of their company's growth. So that would be one thing. And then also the companies that are trying to move to a data center, or move to on-prem or a cloud or something like that. So people that are switching right now, I know the bigger companies have their own processes within their company just to identify these assets. But the ones that are still are in the process of identifying their assets or asset management, this would be a great tool at the same time to see the security posture at the same time. So you have identified your assets. So what is the next step? Have you seen the risk score, or what is the risk posture of your assets? That might be the next step for them to look into.
Makes sense. Anyone else have further thoughts about who you'd like to see aware of this to be able to pick it up and integrate it? And so one thing you sort of flagged is, hey, you got to do a little work here. And this is the trade-off here. Anything that we should know about someone who sort of says, yeah, this Scout seems pretty cool. I don't want to pay the megacorp. I don't want to pay, giant vendor prices. What kind of resources is an organization going to have to line up? And of course, as you pointed out, it depends where they are based on, where they are in their cycle, and are they doing a massive shift, moving around. Anything that you can offer for someone to help plan what it would take to use sort of this Scout model to keep it on a budget?
You can go ahead, Anchal. Do you want to take it? Or can you hear me, Anchal? Do you want to take it?
Oops, you're still on mute, I think.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Sorry for that.
No worries. Yeah. It's now official that we've been on a shared virtual experience. Someone has forgotten they've been on mute.
Yeah, so the one thing I would recommend is if you have a cloud provider, to deploy it there, because that's one of the initial bottlenecks we faced was once we deployed it on our infrastructure was like the scanning part, because scanning takes a lot of time and is mostly limited by the number of network scans that you can launch. So that's one thing I would recommend somebody who's like starting out with this tool to just deploy it on their cloud instance, so they don't have to worry about like scaling the scans and like worrying about the scan times.
I think just to add on to that, probably Anchal, I have seen within our companies where you start scanning these resources coming from these different services like Shodan and all, right? So there might be some false positives, and then your scanner might start scanning them, and then you will be flagged or IP'd from these actual scanning vendors. Say probably if you have deployed it in AWS, they might reach out to you and say, "Are you doing something bad to the other companies," or things like that. So just keep that in mind while we're doing. I mean, I know everybody in the industry might know already. We can't use those, and you will be flagged for sure. So, but just these are small things that you might face during deploying these and probably running the Scout. And also the integrations we have built are probably customized to our environments. So it's just identifying those AWS, probably it might be the common ones you are using, or it could be GCP or Azure. So just knowing those and building those plugins on how we build, taking those steps into consideration on how Anchal has built and mentioned. Some of these components individually are can be directly integrated with the tool that you want to be using it. But some of the components you have to build by yourself, like customizing the actual integrations with the cloud vendor or any other source of platform where you can get your assets. So that's one part you just need to keep in mind, that it's not directly consumable. So you need to create your own stuff before you use it.
Makes sense. Thank you. And sort of thinking about bigger picture, this is, I'm going to put you in a little bit of a spot here. There have been a couple of interesting talks this weekend about compliance, right? This is I need security from my own perspective because risk management is important, but I also often have to demonstrate to someone else, whether it's, my customers or the damn government. Have you thought about using or seeing whether this tool could fit it, whether Scout could sort of support a compliance model? Is that something you've thought about? You're like, you know what, we're just focused on the risk side.
I can take this. I think most of these companies have assets across different regions. Suppose thinking about probably like European countries, and they have some privacy laws compared to United States or UK. Each country has their own. and each have their own IT management or things like that. So you can't just go on and access these assets and scan for those. So there are these laws. But what we have done is we modularized our tool deployment by country, so that we would know, or we would follow the process, so that we don't deploy it, or by in accident we would access any of the assets from different regions. So we are more controlled in that type of fashion, like not scanning the entire infrastructure at the same time, but also making sure that we classify them by countries. So that's one of the that's a good question actually from you. So that's also one thing that everybody have to keep in mind, that privacy is one of those things.
Yeah, that's always nice when we can actually acknowledge that they are collinear, and if you help one, you help the other, rather than trying to say they fight each other.
Yeah.
So,
And it might be a risk in the privacy-based companies, like countries, right? So that might be a risk where it's just scanning itself is a risk. So trying to see the problem.
one of the advantages of being the moderator is I always get to ask about the things that I care about, and one of those is software bill of materials, or Sbomb. Right, the idea that I don't just need to know what the blinking box is on my network, but maybe that blinking box is made by a small vendor, so it's not going to have a CP itself. I need to know what's under the hood, right? I need to know what the components are. Is this, and then obviously map them to potential vulnerabilities. Is this something that you guys could see fitting into the Scout model? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question now. So right now we are solving it in a separate use case, like not using these. We still use our OWASP recommended software, like open source software, like dependency track and all those. But I think integration of, so like Anchal mentioned, right? So for the software that is available, he's just looking at the surface area of these assets, like say which service running, is it exposing the ports that should be or shouldn't be opened, and suppose say 80 and 443. So those are like the common ports to run web application. I mean, 80 we wouldn't recommend, but going into the next level of actually scanning these websites and identifying the vulnerabilities it in like it has, and then going into the components like you mentioned, that has built these to third-party software or things like that, and giving the risk score would always help, because that will prioritize the security operations team to work on which assets up front compared to the other ones, and also the reasons why it has happened, and go back to it and then see. It could solve multiple things, but it's just aggregation of data. I would see it in that side of things, aggregation of data, and giving it a posture to those assets.
I'm going to just start referring to Sbomb as it's only a problem of aggregation of data. How hard can it be? No, this has been really interesting, and thank you guys for taking the time to do this. Tell us, what do you see sort of for the future of Scout? Is this something that you think is, you're going to hope for people to lift, sort of help with the heavy lifting and start to think about their specific use cases? Tell us what you guys have planned for the future in all your infinite spare time on this project.
Anchal, do you want to take it, or
Yeah,
Brittany?
I'll go for the external one. For the external one, I have like two things planned out, which I want to add. One is adding more cloud vendors, so like Azure and GCP, and at least like adding top 5 vendors, which most of the organizations would be using. And the second and the biggest one would be to improve like the scanning time. Since the time we started building it, we have brought down from like 28 days to like 12 hours. And that's my goal, is to like reduce it even more, so that the organizations could get their report faster and they can go on scanning like more assets quicker.
Nice. Is there anything else you want to flag? And Brittany, I can put you on the spot as sort of the horrible cold calling professor. Anything you want to add that we haven't touched on? Because we are just about out of time for our discussion.
Not really. The one I was gonna hit on was gonna be Anchal's last point of always just looking to improve the scanning time and seeing how quickly we can provide that data to the team and whatnot.
Is that the sort of thing that you think of as sort of real time or background cron job? Right. What is taking the time and having it or taking it down by an order of magnitude? How does that help?
It's just the
I think it's the concurrency. Yeah, probably.
yeah concurrency and the size of network that you're scanning. So it might be even like small for like a smaller organization, but it depends on like how many assets do you have or how many assets does Scout discover for your organization. So yeah, that's all we are trying to bring down, but yeah, that's the challenge right now.
Excellent.
And I think probably the one last thing I just need to add was around like I think we were mentioning in the end about IoTs, which are the new subset of your infrastructure that is actually being actively or I would say like most commonly used compared to any other right now, like compared to 5-10 years back. So it's going to change more towards in that side of things. So just to keep that awareness and also try to build those integrations, because it's such a new space. There might be only one or two vendors where you need to integrate with. So that might do a heavy uplifting for us in the sense of it might help a lot of people because they might still be using the same vendor compared to the infrastructure that we integrated with.
Got it. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask one more favor, which is, could one of you post any relevant links in the Discord? There's a GitHub that folks should know about, just so anyone who wants to learn more can track this. As I did not write that down from your video presentation. But unless there's any very short last words. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to present. Thank you for your hard work building this. And if anyone wants to know more, they should reach out directly to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the time at summer camp. We'll talk soon, campers.
Right.